The men of Númenor, those mighty Dunedain of old, held a rare and sacred bond with the Valar, the guardians and stewards of Arda. This relationship was no mere alliance. It was a gift bestowed upon them as a reward for their unwavering bravery and sacrifice during the War of Wrath, which had shattered the Dark Lord Morgoth's power and ended the First Age. In the dawn of Númenor's establishment, the men were filled with wonder and deep gratitude, and their faith in the Valar was as mighty as their newfound island kingdom. The Valar had, after all, granted them this paradise, a land closer to Aman than any other mortal kingdom, a place of beauty, abundance, and a lifespan far exceeding that of other mortal men. But as centuries passed, the hearts of the Númenorians began to shift. It was said that the earliest seeds of doubt were sown subtly, almost imperceptibly. The Númenorians began to look longingly across the Western Sea, toward Aman, the undying lands, and wondered why they, beloved of the Valar, could not join their celestial benefactors in eternal life. For all their blessings, they were still mortal, and the shadow of death loomed over even the longest of lives. And so, as their power and wisdom grew, so too did their ambition. And with ambition came questions. Why had the Valar given them such gifts, only to set boundaries on them? Why bless them with strength and knowledge, only to deny them the ultimate gift of immortality? These questions simmered in their hearts, but for many centuries, they did not openly question the Valar's will. Instead, they sought to live within the natural limits of their mortal existence, cherishing what they had, rather than resenting what they could not attain. Yet, it was during the reign of Tara-Tanamir, the Great, a proud and powerful king, that this quiet discontent finally found its voice. Tara-Tanamir, gifted with both great wisdom and a formidable pride, began to speak openly of the sorrow of men, the gift of mortality that had been bestowed upon them. He began to resent that his people should have to suffer death when the Eldar, who were also children of Eru, could live forever in bliss. Under his rule, the Númenorians began to murmur against the Valar and their decrees, claiming that the gift of men was a burden, a cruel fate placed upon them. But it was not until the arrival of Sauron, the fallen Maia, who had once been a servant of Morgoth, that the final threads of faith began to unravel. Captured in battle yet cunning as ever, Sauron saw the discontent festering in Númenor's heart, and he knew how to fan it into flame. He spoke to the king, Ar-Pharazôn, in honeyed words, persuading him that the Valar were not benevolent guardians, but tyrants who jealously guarded their immortality and withheld it from men out of sheer spite. The Valar, he claimed, feared the Númenorians' strength and potential. They were frightened that, if men gained immortality, they would rival even the greatest powers of a man. And thus, the greatest lie was planted. The fear of death turned to hatred of the Valar. This lie, that the Valar were withholding immortality out of fear and envy, corrupted Númenor to its core. The Númenorians had once viewed mortality as a gift to be embraced, a natural end woven into the design of the world by Eru Ilúvatar himself. Yet Sauron twisted this perception, transforming the Númenorians' awe of the Valar into resentment. Death, once a solemn mystery and a part of life's cycle, became an enemy. The people of Númenor began to see themselves as wronged heirs, unfairly denied their birthright by the Valar, who supposedly wished to keep them weak and subservient. Ar-Pharazôn, the last and most ambitious king of Númenor, fell entirely under Sauron's influence. Despite warnings from faithful advisors and the elves of Tol Eressëa, he succumbed to Sauron's whispers, and the influence of the Valar in Númenorian culture dwindled. Faithful shrines and symbols were defaced or ignored, and the once-honored white tree, Nimloth, began to wither under a growing shadow of neglect and scorn. In place of reverence for the Valar, Sauron subtly introduced the worship of Melkor, the original Dark Lord, whom he claimed held the power to grant eternal life to those who served him faithfully. Under the cover of night, secret sacrifices were offered to Melkor, a practice horrifyingly new and entirely antithetical to everything the Númenóreans had once held dear. As Númenor's people turned to Melkor, their pride and hunger for immortality grew unbridled. The faithful, those Númenóreans who remained loyal to the Valar, were increasingly marginalized and persecuted. These devoted followers, led by those such as Amandil and his son Elendil, attempted to preserve what they could of their ancestors' reverence, keeping alive the memory of Númenor's original faith and respect for the natural order decreed by Eru. However, their voices were drowned out by the fervent cries of a nation that now believed it had been unjustly shackled by the decrees of the Valar. Ar-Pharazôn's fatal act of defiance came when he ordered an armada to set sail westward to Aman. Convinced by Sauron that the Valar were not divine guardians but mere obstacles in his path, Ar-Pharazôn aimed to claim immortality by force. It was a venture born of utter delusion, a tragic misunderstanding of the Valar's nature and the destiny of men. The king and his followers believed that by setting foot on Aman, they would attain eternal life, for they saw the Undying Lands as a land of perpetual youth and endless days. Yet, they failed to understand that immortality was not bound to a place. It was a nature, an essence that no mortal could claim, even if they stood upon the very shores of Aman itself. The Valar, horrified by this defiance, finally intervened, but not by force. Instead, they appealed to Eru Ilúvatar, who alone held the power to alter the very fabric of Arda. And so, in answer, Eru wrought an act of profound and unimaginable consequence. He changed the shape of the world itself. In that instant, Eru Ilúvatar did something unprecedented. The very world was reshaped, and the straight road to Aman, once open to the elves and the blessed Númenóreans, was forever closed to mortal men. Middle-earth and Númenor, once part of a flat world where a man lay across a vast but navigable sea, were cast into a round, closed sphere. Aman and the Undying Lands were removed from the physical world, existing now only in a realm accessible by the elves who held the blessing of the Valar. The world of men became forever separated from the blessed realm, an irreversible division that none could undo. The fleet of Ar-Pharazôn and the men of Númenor who had so arrogantly set foot upon Aman were swallowed by the great cataclysm that followed. The island of Númenor itself, once a paradise and beacon of hope and knowledge, was struck by a mighty wave. Eru Ilúvatar's intervention brought forth an all-consuming storm that engulfed the entire island, and Númenor was swept beneath the sea, leaving nothing but a few scattered survivors to remember its tale. The pride of men was met with ruin, and Númenor, that greatest of mortal kingdoms, perished beneath the waves, becoming the stuff of legend. This was the culmination of Númenor's loss of faith in the Valar, a final and irrevocable consequence. For centuries, the men of Númenor had been drawn toward darkness, deceived by Sauron's lies and their own fear of mortality. Yet, in their desperation for eternal life, they had betrayed the very essence of the gift of men. Their defiance was not merely a rejection of the Valar's laws, but an affront to Eru's design itself, a challenge to the fundamental nature of the world as it had been created. A few among the Númenóreans survived this catastrophe, those known as the Faithful, led by Elendil and his sons, Isildur and Anarion. They had not partaken in the rebellion. They remained loyal to the Valar and fled Númenor before its fall. They bore with them the memory of their people's former glory and the knowledge of Númenor's tragic fate, preserving these tales as a reminder of the price of hubris. Elendil and his people would later establish the kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor in Middle-earth, carrying the remnants of Númenorian culture and wisdom across the sea. But they were forever haunted by the loss of their homeland, and the knowledge that the Valar's mercy had not been enough to save Númenor from its own folly. Through the fall of Númenor, a sobering truth emerged. The faith of men in the Valar was not something that could be maintained through reward alone. The Dúnedain of Númenor had once been a people marked by reverence and humility, their faith grounded in awe and gratitude for the gifts they'd been given. But when their trust wavered, and they sought to change the order of life and death, they unwittingly set into motion their own doom. With Númenor's fall, the surviving Dúnedain inherited a heavy legacy. The faithful, now refugees in Middle-earth, bore the weight of Númenor's ruin as a cautionary tale for generations to come. Their culture would carry reminders of the island's lost grandeur, but also the lesson of humility that had been painfully taught by Eru's intervention. For Elendil and his kin, the memory of Númenor was both a blessing and a warning, a testament to the heights of power and wisdom men could achieve, as well as to the depths of destruction that pride and mistrust could invite. The tragedy of Númenor forever marked the relationship between men and the Valar. The faithful retained their reverence, passing on a guarded respect for the mysteries of life and death decreed by Eru. Yet, in wider Middle-earth, stories of Númenor became cautionary myths, whispered tales of a fallen kingdom that had once defied the Valar and been swallowed by the sea. The lesson endured. In seeking to seize eternity by force, men lost not only their home, but also the faith that had once defined their very identity. And so, Númenor's legacy endures, woven into the histories of Middle-earth, a poignant reminder of what is lost when faith falters and ambition overtakes reverence. For in the end, Númenor's greatest downfall was not wrought by the wrath of the Valar, but by the Númenorians' own hearts, forever haunted by the memory of a paradise that perished beneath the waves.